very much. My name's Graeme. I am the founder of a business called CARAFFI. Our entire purpose is about helping internal talent acquisition deliverers become managers, managers become directors, create strategies that are impactful on the business, not just transactional or burger flipping or placing vacancies and delivery functions, but actually strategic drivers of an organisation. So for about 20 years, we've been looking at how what keeps a CEO up at night. There's really three things. How do we have enough customers, and how do we grow those customers to give us revenue? How do we look at cash, and have we got enough cash to do all the incentives and all the initiatives that we need to do to grow our business in terms of mergers, acquisitions or growth? And then finally, people. Have we got enough people? Have we got the right people in the right jobs doing the right things? And it feels like there's an imbalance in that kind of trinity in business where the people function is not necessarily considered strategic or a strategic driver of a business. And we, as talent acquisition professionals, often find that really even harder, because within the people function, we're often not considered as a strategic driver of that function. So I'm lucky enough to be joined on stage with three people that we've worked with over a long period of time, all very opinionated and all able to articulate, all been really challenging or battling with that issue in their organisations and in their own careers for quite some time. And what we want to do is try and talk about learnings, talk about experiences, and keep this as interactive as we can. I'll hand you over to each and everyone to introduce themselves, and then we'll go into some questions and then hopefully take some from the floor. James, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I've got a varied background in recruitment. I started out as an IT recruiter, spent some time in RPO, and then spent some time in learning and development, actually. And then student recruitment came knocking, and I went and joined EY and did a range of roles with those guys for 7 years, and ended up in the head of student recruitment role for the UK. I left there to join a large global law firm where I was head of early careers, and then I moved to WTW, which is Willis Towers Watson, around about a year ago, in a global head of talent acquisition role, specifically for early careers around the world. If you don't know Willis Towers Watson or WTW, we're a large insurance organisation, and we also support organisations with workforce solutions as well.
Darren.
Cool. Afternoon, everybody. My name's Darren Powley. I'm currently the head of TA for Informa. Most of you probably don't know who Informa is. I certainly didn't when I went for the first interview. Probably didn't after the second interview. I actually still know who they were. We're the world's largest exhibitions business. To give you a rough idea, about 11,000 people across 35 countries, recruit about 3,500 people a year. A bit like James, actually started out life as an IT tech recruiter. Then spent 10 years in an RPO environment, so ran some recruitment for some pretty big customers from an RPO basis. Decided to go in-house, joined Britvic a few years ago and took them on a strategic change programme, and then joined Informa 18 months ago. So, yeah.
Sam.
Hi, I'm Sam Ramsay. I am the Head of Experienced Hire for the UK and Ireland for EY. I probably don't need to explain who EY are, but in terms of my background, starting off in recruitment, not in IT, so that's the difference. Retail recruitment for me, it's always been a massive passion for me. And then various roles from there. Head of recruitment at House of Fraser, Balfour Beatty, Vodafone and EY. Typically, my roles tend to be transformation, so it's to go in and do either a turnaround or a transformation on a TA team, and then probably move on to do something else because I get bored quite easily. Hence, I've done different industries to keep things interesting. That's me.
Brilliant. So we want to aim this session and these Q&As around those of you that are leading or senior TA professionals that are managing teams that want to become directors, or those of you that are TA directors that want to become better ones, and so forth. So this is a safe forum to ask any questions that we have. One of the key differentiators between solid and strong TA directors that we see, ones that have the ear of boards and look at significant transformation, is their ability to align their function with the success of a business and be considered as strategic. In your careers, what have been the biggest barriers to being considered as a strategic function for a business?
So I think one of the things that I found is, and this might be slightly controversial, is when there's no HR strategy, right? So you go in, CPO doesn't have an HR strategy, therefore it's quite difficult to underpin a TA strategy if there isn't the HR strategy. And I think maybe an early mistake definitely is not actually then considering the business strategy. So you create a TA strategy that is probably more based on some metrics that you think are probably the right things, but actually you're not underpinning that against the business strategy. So I think that's definitely a key area. And then I think another reason why TA is probably seen as less strategic is probably an ownership piece, right? We own the recruitment part of it often, so a bit like you said earlier, burger flipping, or hopefully a bit more than that. But when we think about a TA strategy, for me, brand is a big thing. But brand is often owned by comms, right? So we need to get some ownership of that as well. Systems and data, again, quite often we don't own those systems. So it's again about how do you get control of the systems, therefore get control of the data so that you can start to really show what the return on investment is. So I think that's probably, a few of the challenges that I've faced in the past.
Yeah, really good. Sam?
I totally agree with what you said there. I think the other element I'd add to this, if I look back at the different organisations I've been in, it's where the TA function themselves don't necessarily see or understand the importance that they have within the organisation. And, it's very easy for people to become recruiters and just process-orientated, process candidates and CVs and make hires. And I think you can get stuck in that sort of wheel. And if that's what you believe you are, then that's what you're seen as. And it's very difficult to challenge or change that. So there's definitely an element of internally, what do you believe you should be as a TA function, and the impact that you have, and then being able to emulate that externally.
And to build on that, I mean, I think you need a lot of self-confidence and belief, right, in what you stand for and the value that you add, so you know that when you're engaging with your audience. I mean, the whole insight piece is critical. You have that at your disposal, but I think, in line with what you said there, my belief is without trust, you can't take it to a strategic place. And if you think about how do you build trust, you've got to have airtime with those individuals. And what I would say, discipline around what I call set pieces. You need the opportunity to have a strategic platform to have a strategic discussion. You've got to be credible and have the insight and so on to demonstrate excellence, but you need those kind of set points throughout a year or whatever that cadence looks like where you've got the ear of that audience. And I always go back to something I learned at the start of my kind of recruitment days, and maybe this resonates for you. The best recruiters in my mind were the ones that spoke 30% of the time and let the client speak 70% of the time. And I always use that and go back to that. To be strategic, you need to understand what your stakeholders' problems are so that you can solve them.
Yeah, there's an interesting line someone said to me the other day, if you want to be considered strategic, then you better have a strategy. And it sounds like the most ridiculous thing on the planet, but I'll be interested in this panel, when was the first time you saw a TA strategy written in a simple way?
I think in all the jobs I've gone into at this level, there's never been a strategy. So, yeah, sometimes things are in people's heads. It might be on a post-it note somewhere, but yeah, I've never inherited a TA strategy.
Is that fairly consistent?
Yeah, I mean, I think therein lies, sort of, I suppose my first point is that there isn't a strategy because people just think they do recruitment.
Yeah. And
so that's where the cycle is. And then there is no strategy in terms of what you can influence, what your impact is. So it's, very rarely have I gone in and found a strategy.
So what advice would you give? And that's quite common, right? So the first thing we look at with people in senior positions is they feel they should have one. And normally people will say, have you got a strategy? And they'll then talk for 10 minutes about what that strategy is. But the line is, if you can't draw it, you don't have one. And if you can't send it in 30 seconds, you don't have one. But the first thing is to know, actually, if you have one, you're probably in the top 5–10% of TA directors. So the next question is, how does that look, or what should a good TA strategy involve?
I mean, I don't know whether this is contentious, but I think it's difficult to put pen to paper around a roadmap, for example, because I think that the market and the business environment and, you know, economically, everything is so changeable that you've got to be adaptable to that. So I suppose I've started to not necessarily create a strategy as such, to your point, but work more on what's the North Star, what are the strategic pillars that we want to operate within that have, you know, that are rooted in something, but that you can pivot from, so that if you need to respond to whatever conditions there are, it's still rooted within something that is meaningful to the team or to the business, but it's not set in stone that you're going to deliver X in 3 years' time, because actually the environment might be completely different.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say before you think about the strategy, you need to know what are the questions you need to ask so you know the answers, right? You don't know what you know until you know it. So when I joined Informa, I said to the CPO, I'm going to take 6 weeks to do a full audit. Everything drains up recruitment, because there's no point writing a strategy if you don't know what you need to fix, right? And actually, to know what you need to fix, you need to lift the lid, because some things might be done really well, some things might be not done quite as well. There's your low-hanging fruit. But I think if you can afford yourself that time, that's hugely beneficial, right? Because then you can actually write something that's impactful, it's meaningful, it's on the business strategy. Hopefully there's an HR strategy as well. But for me, that is gold dust. If you can get that time to do that work, then you can create the strategy that the business needs.
Brilliant. Just going to go to some of these questions up here, and we'll go to the one that's got the most thumbs up first, I think. But Sam, going to you first. What tangible takeaways can you share to help have a strategic conversation with people that don't understand TA? So, what advice can you give to people that don't intuitively understand TA, or just think it's just recruitment, to help them understand its importance?
I think I'd actually go back to something that James said, is listening to what their problem is, because a lot of the time people go in to sell something. Recruiters, we are salespeople, right? So I completely agree with your point on the listening 70% of the time, is that if you can understand what their problem is, you can then answer it in relation to, but this is how we help you. A lot of the time we go in to say, this is what recruitment do, and actually it doesn't land because it doesn't resonate with them, or they don't have a frame of reference, or it doesn't solve their actual challenge. You know, for example, I was in an organisation where we really struggled for strategic workforce planning. I know everybody probably rolls their eyes at strategic workforce planning because nobody can do it properly. And even though people understood the concept, they really struggled to get what they would need to do and the impact for them. And as many times as we tried to explain it, they really struggled to get it. So then I changed it and said, OK, well, what's the biggest problem that they have? And the biggest problem that they had was, you know, something around diversity in that particular organisation. So I said, OK, so if we apply the thinking of strategic workforce planning to your diversity plan, this is what it means. And I've done the data, and this is what it's telling me. And people are like, oh, now I get it, because they get it because it's something that's important to them and it resonates with them, and you've attached it to something that's more tangible at that time. So a lot of the times you can go in too big, you know, to be talking recruitment terms. So it just, yes, it's something that we do every day, but it isn't something that they do every day.
Yeah.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, there's a really good. I think I'm going to give you this credit, Darren. I'm not sure it was you, but I'm giving you the credit. Where once you said we've got to be business people that are really good at TA, not TA people that know a little bit about business. So the first thing when you're talking about making it relevant is, where's the business going? If you're a head of, or you're talking about a TA directorship, where's the business going and where are their metrics? and how does TA impact that? So I think there's a question up here. What advice do you have to get C-suite on board with your strategy? So first off, I think what we've been saying is understand what their strategy is and then link it. Can you give any kind of examples about how you do it? There's another piece in here about how you can measure that as a performance. And I think what we're saying here, or a lot of the questions about, is not just how do you link it with the strategy, but how do you make it relevant? How do we talk about not transactional metrics, but performance metrics? And how do you manage that?
Yeah, I think traditionally TA functions were judged on the traditional metrics, time to hire and CV to interview, which are all good things, right? But actually, for me, it's about the impact metrics. So who joins and who stays and who gets promoted in the first 2 years, right? How are you affecting that churn? And if you can start to show what that true cost is to the C-suite, that's when I think you can start to get their ear. Actually, what is the true cost of a bad piece of recruitment? And for me, that's been a really interesting way in. And it's things like when you're sat in front of really senior sales professionals, if you can start to talk about you're going to impact their sales figures, right, by recruiting better, by understanding who comes in and performs, then you take all of that back to where you find those people from and how do you attract more of those individuals. That really gets them listening, rather than if you just talk about, well, look, we hire these people in 35 days and how good are we?
So what metric could you show to say your recruitment has impacted a sales figure, legitimately and unequivocally?
Well, I mean, you can talk about, obviously, the sales figures that they're doing in the first 2 years, right?
Yeah.
So, and actually, if you can start to show that the people that you've recruited are performing better, then for me, they're the metrics that we need. But actually, as I said, it's who gets promoted and who stays as well.
Yeah, so recruitment not as a cost,
no,
but as a revenue generator.
Yeah.
If you got given an extra 20k of budget today, what would you spend it on, James? In a work environment.
Glad you asked, James.
Yeah. One of our business challenges right now is about our brand. For me, it would go into that kind of area. It'd be about really exploring our footprint in the market.
Mm-hmm. Sam?
What would it be? I'd probably say it's a difficult one because there's quite a few. What would I put 20k into?
20k is difficult in the world of EY.
Yeah.
That's
what I was like, right? How do I say that without saying that?
Better cakes.
Yeah. It would go towards. It would go towards. For me, my biggest pain point right now is our career site. It's horrific.
Yeah.
The global career site is genuinely, it's just horrific.
Darren?
I'd probably have to follow James and say brand. When I joined, quite a few people told me that Informa are the biggest business you've never heard of. And that was a deliberate thing for Informa. But from a recruitment point of view, it doesn't get much worse than that. Right? If nobody knows who you are, how do you become a destination employer? So 20k isn't a lot of money, but I would do the best I could with that to increase the brand.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
OK. I'm kind of going to go to the second one because I just really would like to hear the answer to this question. But what's the biggest mistake you've made in your career that you think will help people trying to become TA or better TA directors?
I mean, a fairly sizable one was running the outsourced recruitment for Sky, so for non-volume, which was still 3,500 hires, created our first sourcing function and basically staffed that sourcing function with grads, straight out of uni grads. So we basically gave the hardest to fill roles to these 20-somethings that had no recruitment experience and said, build me a talent pool of architects, Java developers, this, that, and all the other. And it didn't work that well. So
that's such a common mistake, though, right? Is, sourcing seen as junior recruitment, but normally targeted at the most difficult skills.
Yeah. So that was definitely a learning experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I think I'd probably answer it with saying it's something that that I always struggle with, as opposed to a particular mistake that I can think of in relation to this question. But it's very much around you know, I work at a real pace, and I always have to remind myself that I have to make sure that the business is on board. And there are times when I've gone ahead with something that I know is going to work, and actually come up against obstacles later on because I hadn't officially checked that everyone was 100% understanding what I was doing, and then had to go back and then, of course, get it to work, and then it's fine. But I still have that. That's just my personality. But I would say that's the hardest thing.
Is that up or down the chain? Is that to the team or
up.
to up? Yeah. What do you put in place to help that? Because I think that's a major problem, right? Communication of how we do it. Well, this is our objective. This is how we're doing against it. What sort of things can you put in place to?
My strategy is never more than a handful of things that we're going to do. So it's keeping that to a smaller number. So it's easier to be very consistent and very clear about what we're looking to do and why. And just, I think it's just over time. I was getting old, right? So I'm getting older, you know? I take a little bit more time. I'm marginally less impatient. And you know, I think those learns have made me go, OK, might need to take us another couple of weeks, have a few more meetings. And I'm a recruiter, so I'm like, So like, can we just get on and do it? You know, so it's kind of just reminding myself just to take some time before we race off ahead doing something. So I think from a strategy and implementing a strategy or any changes, that's something I would always say is important to remember.
Yeah, brilliant. James?
I think my biggest mistake was I let my ego get in the way of my own progression at one point. So I'd gone for a role that I was really passionate about getting, and somebody else was successful in getting that role. And they came into the business, and I was encouraged to partner with them and help make them successful, which is a really tough pill to swallow, right? So, and I started out on that trajectory, and I was absolutely trying to kind of help them be successful and so on. And it got to probably about a month or two into their role, and they were leading a large kind of transformation project. And I remember the kind of head of TA at the time, and we were in this round table with loads of different suppliers, and we were all collaborating with loads of ideas and stuff. And I was getting quite carried away and putting things forward, and being quite creative and all this kind of stuff. And I could feel him. He kept kind of shutting me down and almost like, let that person speak, let that person lead, I was thinking, fuck it. And so I was a bit like a petulant child and just decided to sit there and just be quiet. So I just kind of sat there and just didn't put my idea forward. And then I did my kind of role thereafter, and I delivered, but I made sure that that person had to stand on their own 2 feet. And if there was stuff coming up in some of these transformation meetings and so on that I could spot was going to be a car crash, I didn't say anything. And I let them make that mistake. But what happened down the line was that person actually wasn't very well at one point, and they had to leave the business for 3 to 6 months, I think. And the responsibility befell upon me. And all those things that we put in place that weren't necessarily spot on, I could have had a real impact on helping steer the ship. And so in a roundabout way, I kind of screwed myself over, to be honest with you. And that's a real regret of mine, because it's not in my nature or my style. It was a big lesson learned for me.
Yeah, I think finding your style as a leader and being authentic, not playing the role you think you need to be as a leader, or translating that, or worse, being the leader you think your boss needs you to be.
Yeah.
I think being authentic is, and everyone will make that mistake at least once in their life, trying to be someone they're not. So, last question from the floor, which we'll go with the top one here. When joining a business, how do you set expectations of what is owned by TA? That's often unclear. I think you mentioned that early on, Darren, about tech and brand being part of TA. Sometimes it's not, sometimes it's elsewhere. How do you set that expectation? And it mentions here, especially when entering an environment where TA is an extension of HR. I don't think, that bit's probably doesn't matter in terms of where it is, but how do you set expectations, and how strong are you on what is owned by TA?
I'd probably say, firstly, you need to understand the purpose of TA, because otherwise what you do is you go in and go, right, that's mine, that's yours, this is what I do. And the challenge that you come up against is the fact that people disagree with the purpose of what you're supposed to be doing. So you could be talking around all the elements up here, but actually it's understanding, okay, what is our purpose? What is it that we're expected to deliver? I don't mean 75 hires here and whatever it might be, but as in, what is the purpose of TA? What are you expecting? What does good look like? Do we agree on that central purpose? And therefore, if we do agree on that central purpose, then therefore this is what we therefore own in order to deliver against that. So I would take it down a notch into agreeing a purpose.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I would just take it back to that, as I said, that pre-work, the audit work, right? Understanding what's in the strategy, and if it's part of your strategy to deliver, you need to be owning it. Yeah. And I think to go and have really, be prepared to have tough conversations with people. As I said, group comms are always an interesting one. But I think, to stand your ground and to own it, because if it's part of your strategy and you're going to be judged on it, you need to own it. Yeah. Right. But I think it's about understanding to your point what you need to own. Yeah. And then taking ownership of it.
So just conscious of time, just wrapping up the things that I've kind of learned there. Have a strategy, right one. Yeah. Make sure it's understandable and short. Align it with the business. Be yourself as a leader, and then measure TA not on over-the-door metrics, but on the performance of people post-hire.
And if you have to rewrite your strategy every year, you haven't got a strategy, you've got a list of actions.
Yeah.
That's not a strategy.
Agreed.
That's what I would say.
Brilliant.
To redo it every year, it's not a strategy.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cool.
Excellent. Big round of applause.